I'm sorry for your loss. With 5 devastating words, you've just entered the most predatory marketplace in America, where your grief has a price tag. While you're planning a loved one's final goodbye, they're calculating your emotional vulnerability. In that moment of deepest grief, you'll make financial decisions that would be unthinkable in any other circumstance. The exploitation is systematic. The average funeral costs $9,420, a 227% increase since 1986. Caskets are marked up by an average of 289%, sometimes exceeding 600%. 78% of grieving families report feeling pressured to purchase services they didn't need. A former funeral director revealed, "We were trained to identify the family decision maker, isolate them, and never show pricing until emotional commitment is established." This isn't a few bad actors. It's a $20 billion industry built on exploiting our most vulnerable moments. And for those who think these problems are rare, between 25% and 40% of families report encountering issues like hidden fees, poor service, or deceptive practices. But how did we get here? How did an industry meant to provide dignity become so exploitative? The answer lies in a transformation that began over a century ago. The American funeral industry didn't always exist in its current form. In the 19th century, burials were simple and handled by families. Death was a personal, intimate event. Then the Civil War changed everything. With soldiers dying far from home, embalming emerged as a way to preserve bodies for long journeys. By the early 20th century, funeral directors began positioning themselves as professionals of death. In 1963, the average funeral cost $710. Local family-owned funeral homes served their communities. But a massive transformation was coming. 1994 to 1999, Service Corporation International acquires over 1,700 independent funeral homes. 2006 to 2016, private equity firms poured $8.6 billion into the recession-proof death care sector. Today, the top 3 funeral conglomerates control 19% of all funeral homes and 23% of revenue. These corporate chains discovered a powerful truth. Grieving customers rarely comparison shop. As one executive told shareholders, "Our business benefits from the fact that the customer base doesn't view our services as discretionary." Corporate-owned funeral homes charge 49.5% higher prices than independent providers, with profit margins 12.5%, exceeding grocery stores 2.5%, restaurants 6.1%, and retail clothing 8.0%. The business model is sophisticated vulnerability exploitation, explains Dr. Angela Martinez, who studies funeral economics. They've engineered every aspect of the funeral process to capitalize on grief-impaired decision-making. But nowhere is this exploitation more evident or more profitable than in the room where you'll make your single biggest funeral purchase decision. We don't want to think of mom in anything less than the best. This seemingly natural sentiment is precisely what the funeral industry counts on when selling you a casket. What they don't tell you, that premium metal casket with a $3,995 price tag costs them just $950 wholesale. The markup would be illegal in many industries. In the funeral business, it's standard practice. Caskets account for 1/3 of funeral revenue, but nearly half of total profits. 91% of funeral homes arrange displays with the most expensive models at eye level. Directors are trained to present 3 options: high-priced, mid-range, and budget, knowing most families choose the middle option. Former funeral director James Miller revealed, "We were taught to start by showing the $10,000 casket first, not because anyone buys it, but because it makes the $5,000 model seem reasonable by comparison." It's classic anchoring psychology. Internal documents show directors are trained to use terms like protection, dignity, and lasting tribute, language specifically chosen to bypass rational decision-making and trigger emotional spending. Most disturbing is the practice of preemptive quality shaming, subtly implying that less expensive options reflect a lack of love. As one training manual states, never directly suggest that price reflects love, but ensure customers make the connection themselves. But the casket sale is just the beginning. Once you've committed to the purchase, you'll be offered something even more insidious: products that make scientifically impossible promises. This protective seal will preserve your loved one. With this simple promise, funeral directors sell thousands of dollars in utterly useless protective features, gaskets and seals that supposedly protect against the elements. There's just one problem. They do nothing of the sort. Is it science or just a sales pitch? Sealed caskets actually accelerate decomposition by creating anaerobic conditions. Studies found no measurable preservation difference between sealed and unsealed caskets. The FTC prohibits claims that these features preserve remains. Yet 72% of consumers report hearing these exact claims. Dr. William Bass, founder of the University of Tennessee's Body Farm, states, "Sealed caskets are the emperor's new clothes of the funeral industry. They have absolutely no preservation benefits, but they're sold as if they're essential." These protective features typically add $800 to $1,500 to a casket's price. A former manufacturing executive admitted, "The gasket costs us about $20 to produce. The rest is pure profit built on fear." The exploitation goes even deeper. Funeral homes have been caught illegally harvesting body parts from the deceased. In New York City, funeral homes partnered with a biomedical company to harvest tissues, bones, and organs from over 1,000 corpses without family consent. They replaced bones with plastic pipes to hide the theft. Even the late broadcaster Alistair Cook had his bones harvested and sold without his family's knowledge. In the tri-state crematory scandal, over 300 bodies were discovered decomposing instead of being properly cremated. Families were given cement dust instead of their loved ones' ashes. Industry insiders have a term for selling useless features, FUDGE. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt generate expenditures. Training videos instruct staff to leverage natural anxiety about decomposition to guide protective purchase decisions. But perhaps the most ingenious profit scheme emerged when the industry faced its greatest threat, the rise of cremation. We recommend our Dignity Cremation Package to honor your loved one's memory. With this gentle suggestion, funeral directors transform a simple $700 cremation into a $4,200 cremation service. Welcome to the industry's fastest-growing profit center. As cremation rates climb from 26% to 57% in 2 decades, funeral homes faced a crisis until they discovered how to make cremation even more profitable than burial. The cremation profit machine. Actual cost of cremation, $250 to $300. Average charge for direct cremation, $2,300, 650% markup. Add ceremonial services and the revenue jumps to $4,977, 70% profit margin. The key is decoupling the disposition from the service, convincing families that cremation is just the disposal method, not a replacement for expensive funeral rituals. Those services include rental caskets, $1,200, witnessing fees, $250 to $600, and expedited cremation charges, $400. Former crematory operator Samuel Davidson revealed, "The witnessing fee is pure profit because there's nothing to witness, it's a production line." Some operators take deception to criminal extremes. At Sunset Mesa Funeral Home in Colorado, instead of cremating bodies, the owner was illegally selling body parts to medical research companies while returning concrete dust to families. The profit margins extend to urns, with markups from 300% to 1,200%. A brass urn selling for $495 costs $45 to $60 wholesale. But the funeral industry's most ingenious profit scheme targets customers long before death ever occurs. Lock in today's prices and protect your family from future financial burdens. This pitch has convinced millions of seniors to prepay for funeral services, creating a massive pool of $18 billion in funds paid for services not yet rendered, sometimes decades in advance. 87% of pre-need contracts contain clauses allowing substitution of comparable merchandise, effectively negating price guarantees. Only 8 states require 100% of pre-need funds be placed in trust. Most allow funeral homes to access up to 40% immediately as administrative fees. When funeral homes change ownership, pre-need contracts are often revalued under new pricing structures. Elizabeth Mason's mother prepaid $8,200 for a guaranteed funeral in 2010. When she died in 2022, the funeral home, now under corporate ownership, demanded an additional $3,700 for non-guaranteed costs. "They held my mother's body hostage until I paid," Mason told us. "What choice did I have?" Pre-need salespeople, working on commission rates of 20 to 30%, target senior communities and retirement homes. Training materials instruct them to Create urgency through fear of becoming a burden to loved ones. A former salesperson described memory care unit campaigns where representatives approach families of dementia patients. We were told to get the children involved if the senior seemed confused. The goal was always a signature before leaving. With such blatant exploitation, you might wonder, who's protecting consumers from these practices? The disturbing answer reveals perhaps the industry's most powerful advantage. In 1984, the Federal Trade Commission implemented the funeral rule, the only significant federal regulation of the industry. It requires funeral homes to provide itemized price lists and disclose that embalming is rarely required. Nearly 4 decades later, the rule remains virtually unchanged. The reason? A systematic capture of the regulatory system by industry interests. The death care lobbying machine. The funeral industry spends $3.4 million annually on federal lobbying. Industry PACs contributed $9.6 million to state legislators between 2016 and 2022. 26 state funeral regulatory boards have a majority of members from the industry they're supposed to regulate. The funeral rule hasn't been updated in 40 years. Many funeral homes still aren't required to post prices online, making comparison shopping nearly impossible. Since 2010, 16 states have considered legislation requiring online pricing disclosure. None have passed. A 2022 study found that in states where regulatory boards are controlled by industry members, consumer complaints are 41% less likely to result in disciplinary action. As consumer advocate Shauna Wilson explains, who's going to file a complaint about a funeral home while they still have a loved one's remains? By the time families realize they've been exploited, they're emotionally exhausted and just want to move on. In 2022, the FTC conducted just 124 inspections among America's 19,000-plus funeral homes, issuing only 26 warnings for violations. One former regulator admitted, "We're not protecting consumers, we're protecting the industry's profit margins." So with such a rigged system, what can consumers possibly do to protect themselves? The answer may surprise you. So how do you avoid becoming the funeral industry's next target? 3 simple steps. Know your rights. The FTC funeral rule entitles you to itemized pricing. Demand it, compare costs, and refuse unnecessary services. Consider alternatives. Nonprofit funeral homes, green burials, death doulas, and community-owned funeral societies can cut costs by 30 to 60% while providing dignified services. Plan ahead. The average American spends more time researching a $2,000 refrigerator than a $10,000 funeral. Don't make decisions while grieving. The tide is turning. Transparent providers are emerging. Green burial sites have expanded from 6 to over 350 nationwide. Consumer advocacy membership has tripled. As Joshua Williams, who operates a transparent funeral home, puts it, "We still make a reasonable profit, but we don't need to exploit grief to do it. Death is inevitable, but exploitation doesn't have to be." Subscribe for more industry exposés and share your own thoughts in the comments below. Next week, the cemetery business, where the real money is buried.